Now, we are going to be talking about the story that has dominated the headlines over the last couple of weeks. It is the post office scandal. It's been such a huge couple of weeks for the 555 sub-postmaster and sub-mistresses and the hundreds more who've been impacted by this post office scandal. Some of those people they've been campaigning for decades for justice. But the public inquiry into the post office IT scandal has been hearing from an investigator now whose work did lead to criminal prosecutions of some of those sub-postmasters. The post office investigator, Stephen Bradshaw, denied claims that he and others behaved like mafia gangsters when investigating losses at the branches. He told inquiry lawyer Julian Blake he was not technically minded and couldn't have known about the bugs in the Horizon system.
So it's your evidence that because you didn't receive any information about bugs, errors and defects from somebody higher above you in the post office, you don't have any reflections on that?
I would see the Horizon system. I have no reason to suspect at the time that there was anything wrong with the Horizon system because we've not been told.
Well, the Labour MP, Kevin Jones, is a leading campaigner for the victims and says Fujitsu must take responsibility for its role in the saga.
I think it's remarkable that Fujitsu have said nothing this week and are hiding behind the inquiry. That's just not acceptable for a large international company such as that. But, we've got evidence already to the inquiry, and it was in the drama documentary where we know that they knew there were faults in this system. We need to know who knew what was covered up.
Well, Alan Bates, who of course inspired the recent ITV drama Mr Bates versus the Post Office, says there is still more work to be done.
It's another positive step forward, but it's still things aren't happening quick enough for the original group. I mean, some of them it's very good news for those which have the smaller claims, but the bulk, I think, are still waiting, and we've got to see what they're going to do to try and speed them up. Devil is in the detail. We've yet to see that. So, but I mean, we're still going to have to keep pushing the whole issue forward.
Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to solicitor Michael Madden, who's representing over 20 former sub-postmasters in Northern Ireland. 3 came forward last week after watching the ITV drama.
The inquiry is extraordinary in the fact that we're now seeing people who are the front line of investigating sub-postmasters in the scandal. Postmasters who have felt and quite correctly felt that they were harassed and they were improperly investigated and accused of stealing from post office when they knew that they were totally innocent. And they're now seeing the people who were conducting these interviews and subjecting them to bullying treatment now having to face questions themselves. So from the point of view from the people who were prosecuted, it's extraordinary.
Just the human impact that it's had on them. There was one instance where apparently this accusation, obviously, of money disappearing, where they all blamed each other. They all, thought that because they knew it wasn't them, they knew they weren't taking the money, so it had to be somebody else. And to this day, there are relationships that have broken down, people who don't speak anymore. And it's those simple stories away from some of the things that we've been hearing that you can completely relate to, that it has destroyed people's lives.
It's devastating, and from a point of view as a lawyer, people come to me and they tell me what happened to them, and I then try and analyse that and find legal solutions. But on a human level, it's quite difficult to hear people telling you things that they've carried with them for 20 years or more, and things that they have never told another soul, and it's for people now to be able to come forward is very encouraging, and the swell of public support that have come out since the ITV drama has been fantastic now, because it's just given encouragement to people who just couldn't bring themselves to come forward and get their names cleared, and they're now getting that confidence to do that.
It's incredible, isn't it, that it did take this ITV drama for people to feel confident to come forward, even though they knew they were innocent, but until now they've not felt comfortable about talking about it, about coming to somebody like you.
Well, it's amazing how close Post Office were to really getting away with what they did. The general mood is that obviously it's overwhelming emotion quite difficult. There are some clients who are obviously aware of the drama, but still can't watch it because it'll bring it all out again. So it's whenever you think of what these people have gone through, it's the insidious way that they were investigated and accused, that it was a computer system that was actually at fault. But these people were made to feel that it was them. They were losing their minds. They were not doing their job properly. They had family members who were maybe working for them, stealing from them. It just went to the core of who they were, and it absolutely devastated people's lives.
That was Michael Madden, who's representing over 20 former sub-postmasters in Northern Ireland. Alan McLaughlin is a former Belfast sub-postmaster whose convictions were quashed in 2022. Good morning, Alan.
Morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, more to the point? How have the last few weeks been for you and for your family?
Well, the last few weeks have seen a sea change in attitudes. I mean, the world is a very different place this week than it was 2 weeks ago before the ITV drama. Let's put it that way.
In what way?
Well, I think obviously for people who have lived with the experience for 20 odd years, we knew, and a handful of other voices were always speaking up from about 2010 or so, whenever the first pieces started appearing in Private Eye, whenever Nick Wallace started writing pieces. You know, the information has been there since even as far back as then, but it's really taken a very powerful TV drama to bring it home to everyone else that most of the people whose lives were impacted by the post office, that's about 3,500, who in some way or another were penalised by the post office for faults in their Horizon system, for nothing that they had done. I think it's taken that for people to realise just how many people involved, just how massive the effort of the post office was to prevent these people from, ever finding some kind of resolution, and also just how long it's taken to get anything done, which is astounding.
And that's it. And the fact that it did take a TV series like this. And there's a lot of focus, obviously, on the finance of this and the loss of money. But I suppose on a very, very personal level, just how that feels to be accused of something like this. And thereafter, what the fallout after that, the fact that people that you know, friends, family, might have doubted you, might not believe you.
Well, a lot of people were clearly overwhelmed by what happened. You saw in the drama, there were each person's reactions were different. So some people simply couldn't understand what had happened. I mean, they knew they hadn't done anything, but they felt overwhelmed by the weight of pressure that the post office brought on them. Obviously, others, like myself, right from the start, we knew there was a problem with the system, and we complained the whole way through. And my reaction was probably one more of anger with the post office that they couldn't admit that the system was wrong, that they preferred to blame honest, hardworking, ordinary people, and that it took so long for the penny to drop with, especially with Parliament, of course, because that's where real change is affected. I mean, there were, as I said before, the information was out there, the documentaries were there, the material was there, the individual MPs and individual journalists were all saying the same thing, and yet it took a TV drama to bring it home to the wider public that the post office was continuing to stymie any attempt to have conditions overturned and to stymie any attempt to find resolution and compensation.
Have you been watching the public inquiry, or has it been too difficult, or what have you made of it?
No. I love to see the whole thing unravelling in front of me. Absolutely no problem whatsoever. I mean, like Alan Bates, I always thought that I would get back to the material that I had at some point. I kept quite a comprehensive record, basically thousands of pages of documentation, plus reports from forensic accountants and whatnot. And I knew that someday I would get back to that material. I don't think it would take 15 years, but we are where we are.
And it's interesting, we're hearing the stories now about the investigators and those sort of details. And Stephen Bradshaw, who appeared yesterday, one of the post office investigators, was forced to deny claims that he and others, as they put it, behaved like mafia gangsters. What was your treatment like at the time by those investigators?
No, the investigators that I dealt with weren't like him. I mean, he was just an uncouth bully. No, they were quite correct, quite professional. Actually, all of these people are going to be brought before the inquiry, so you'll see that there are a range of different sort of types of person or personality types involved in this. So yeah, like I said, all our experiences were different. They weren't exactly the same, but the pattern, of course, was the same. The series of events that were initiated by the post office was the same. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the inquiry is so important, because it's finally got to the level of the kind of apparatchiks who carried out orders from above. Obviously, in law, carrying out orders from above isn't a legal offence, but we're getting to see who these people were. And of course, and that's another thing that I certainly felt at the time. I knew that at some point the people who were doing this to me, the tables would be turned, and that they would be subject to investigation and they would be held to account for what they did and why. Because I think, I mean, the other thing is too, I mean, when Bradshaw was talking, I mean, he was involved in a number of cases. Did it not dawn on him that there was a pattern of events here? That the people he was dealing with were just normal people? I mean, it's amazing, because after Horizon came in 1999, all of a sudden, the post office discovered over the next 10 years or so, 3,500 people that they took action against. In the period before that, you could count on one hand the number of sub-postmasters who faced criminal action. So what was it about this point that changed that? And it never dawned on anyone from senior post office management all the way down to these apparatchiks.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it? That this public inquiry will get to the bottom of that. And Alan Bates, you know, the man behind the ITV, and the title of the ITV programme, he says, you know, the devil is in the detail. We are yet to hear and see some of those details. What do you expect to come out now?
Well, now the questions are being asked. Who did what they did, why they did it, who authorised it, and also, obviously, of course, what were the consequences of their actions? I mean, these are perfectly legitimate questions to ask of a publicly funded body. You know, this is a body which the government is the main stakeholder in, which has the government is supposed to have an oversight role. Well, the obvious question is, what happened to this oversight role? What happened to checks and balances? Why were there no attempt at any point by government during that to call a halt to what was going on? Because the government could have stopped this at any point. I mean, the government appoints their representatives to the Post Office Board. Nick Wallace, whose book, of course, the Post Office Scandal, is a great insight into the whole process. He has provided biographical details of these people. He has attempted to ask each one of them what they did, when, what happened, what did they report back to the Cabinet, and not one has deemed it worthy to reply.
What do you hope to get out of this inquiry? What's the end result? And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is, for some people, is going to be finance, because obviously a lot of people lost a lot of money. But what is enough to draw a line under this?
I think they have to be held to account. You can't have a public body using the entire panoply of powers vested in it to go after innocent people in order to protect its own shortcomings. And that's essentially what happened. This system was flawed, and they knew it was flawed before it was even put in, and yet they ploughed on regardless. Rather than take stock to revise what was happening, to put more sound procedures in place, no, they preferred to go with a heavy-handed approach and to ruin, to impact on 3,500 people's lives and their families, of course, and wider communities. And
it's about their reputations. I mean, the most recent coming out that the Post Office actually threatened and lied to the BBC while they tried to keep this evidence and and smeared postmasters ahead of that Panorama documentary, which broadcast in 2015.
That was a documentary in 2015.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the efforts that they allegedly went to try to keep themselves out of the headlines, it's extreme, and to what cost?
Well, I think the culture of secrecy that pervades the post office, this supposed ostensibly publicly owned body. I mean, the point of perjury and the scale of perjury, because perjury is a criminal offence, of course, is where these people are really starting to feel quite nervous, because it's all going to come out. They can't. They not only did they lie to the BBC and to journalists and MPs who were asking questions then, they lied to Parliament, they lied to the courts, they lied to the Public Prosecution Service, they lied to defence solicitors and teams. They said that information wasn't available. They said there was no material whatsoever which in any way questioned or challenged the functionality of the Horizon system. Well, we know that's a big lie. It's an enormous lie, and it's a lie which they spent 25 years trying to sustain. Mm-hmm. And let's not be in any doubt, they would have continued to do that had it not been for 4 hours of TV drama.
And that's
Nothing was going to change.
That's what it comes down to, the power that we're talking about here. And when we mentioned this Panorama programme and the BBC revealing the details of this, I mean, when they were going up against an organisation like the BBC, they were using these tactics. Experts were sent intimidating letters, those who were interviewed by the BBC. Senior post office managers briefed the BBC that neither their staff nor Fujitsu could remotely access sub-postmasters' accounts, even though post office directors had been warned 4 years earlier. All these details were coming out, and then they were sending lawyers even at the BBC and those who were being interviewed. So you get a sense of what was happening to the sub postmasters, and that's on a much smaller scale. You don't have the resources to deal with that.
No. Well, imagine that happening to individuals. Mm-hmm. Whenever bodies like the BBC are threatened, whenever MPs are threatened, whenever, say, journalists and newspapers are threatened, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. They expect that kind of thing in the normal course of their work. But imagine that happening to ordinary working people who had never had any experience of the law whatsoever. And also the fact that they were told that they were alone. So they believed that they were the only person being prosecuted or challenged in this way. Now that's a hell of a lot to take on board, and I mean, some people were badly affected by this. Obviously, lives were ruined. More than 60 of the original 736 prosecutions, people have died. Other people are literally in the same position they were in as in March 2019 of the appeals court. Nothing has happened to people. The public may have assumed that after the famous appeal court decision in March 2019, the things were progressing nicely for that group and then for the wider group. Well, they haven't been. The post office, basically, the post office should not have a role in the process of appeals or the process of compensation. You can't let the perpetrators decide what happens to the victims.
Yeah.
That's absurd.
Well, the public inquiry is continuing. Alan McLaughlin, thank you so much for your time this morning. Good luck to you. Anyone who's listening to this or anyone who's been affected by this story, it is worth watching the BBC Panorama programme as well that was broadcast in 2015. It's called Panorama, the Post Office Scandal.